Alright folks, working on hubs today, or rather wheel bearings. Already got the Jeep up on jack stands. Before I got all this started, I did break the dust cap loose. That was rusted on. I broke all these drive flange nuts loose. They're not loose, but I just broke the tension on them. It's the same with the wheel lugs. So the reason I'm doing this is on the last test drive, or rather when I drove it to the shop to get the rear axle inspected, I could hear that when I went through corners, the wheels were kind of doing this back and forth, so like this, top to bottom. And that's usually because of the hub bearings, wheel bearings, are either worn out or just loose. I could hear when I'm going straight, it sounded fine, but when you turn, you could hear the drums rubbing against the shoes. You could tell the wheel was moving, and there's quite a bit of movement in that. It's not as much side to side. I think the steering components are relatively tight. The box is loose, but the components are relatively snug. But this is not tight. So, gonna get the wheel off. The wheel's gonna come off, and the next we need to get the dust cap off again. Looking at that, the grease in there was in relatively good shape. It looked relatively fresh. Not brand new by any means. But the end of the axle shaft was not full of water or rust or anything like that, which was good. Like I said, it was kind of a bear to get off. I did have to bend this up quite a bit, and it took a lot of persuading with a hammer and a pry bar, but it did come off. This is one of those times where you wish you had an impact. You guys don't need to sit and watch me take lug nuts off. Turn this back on, we're ready to do something else. Okay, wheels off, drums off. Kind of good way to quickly inspect the shoes and see how they're not fully bedded in yet. They still got some shiny spots on them. But then again, I've only driven it 4 miles or 8 miles, so to be expected. Next bit is going to be to take these off. It's 9/16. And like I said, I already busted them loose. Let's just make sure they'll come loose. Those are gonna. All right, I'm gonna need a pry bar to get those off. All right. Get a pry bar, and I'll take that off too. Pry bar acquired. It was right behind me. So this is gonna come right off because I spent an hour yesterday beating it with a hammer, prying it with a pry bar. Well, I say it's going to come off, it's still snug there. Beating it with a pry bar and a hammer. Ended up using a claw hammer as well. It's not exactly the right tool for that, but whatever. You do have to kind of pull it straight off. If you get it cockeyed on there, it'll get stuck on the end of the flange. Things you learn after you spend an hour fighting with something. Sorry, I keep bumping the camera. It's probably going to be really loud. And my sinuses are acting up today too, so you're going to get to hear me sniffle a lot. So, you get the idea. This just works its way off. In a perfect world, it would just slide right off, but it's going to fight me. Maybe it'll come off now. Nope, it's still stuck on there. Like I said, it has to come straight off. If you get it cockeyed like that, it doesn't want to come off. Store that over there. So This is the end of the drive flange. So this is what actually, if you had selectable hubs, like you can lock them in and out. Obviously you'd have the big hub assembly on the end. This Jeep does not have that. It's just got the full-time entry-level hubs. These were the factory stock configuration. I think in '73, Jeep offered the selectable hubs as an upgrade, but this Jeep is the bare bones edition. So this plate right here is responsible for translating the torque from the differential. The rotation comes through the axle shaft here, engages this, which is bolted to the wheel, which turns the wheel. So when you're in two-wheel drive, this front end is spinning all the time, but the transfer case is in neutral, or effect it's in two-wheel drive, so it's just free wheels, the front end. But when you engage four-wheel drive, it sends power up the front, turns the differential, turns the axle shaft, which engages the drive plate, which is bolted to the hub, which is bolted to the wheel. You get the idea. So it's always engaged. There is a snap ring on the end here, you can see. So I've got some snap ring pliers. We'll try to get that off. My hands are so greasy I can't touch the camera now. So we'll get that off, and then we'll take all these bolts out. And the hub, the flange may come off. It does have a boss or a thing here you can grip on with a puller and push against the shaft and pop it out. The service manual does say to use a puller. I have a set of pullers down there that I had from my old Jeep Commando. I'm sure I have something that'll fit this at least well enough to get it off. It shouldn't be on there too terribly tight, but we'll see. So snap ring first, and then we'll go from there. Snap ring pliers. If you've never seen these used, they just go in right here. They've got adjustable tips and things. Obviously I'm not a pro at using these. I've never used ones this nice before. Should just snap off of there. It's probably going to want to come back and hit you in the face. And there it is. It's off. And now you see the axle's able to move in and out freely. This just keeps the axle from walking too far in or too far out. Probably more too far in than anything else, because you can see now that this is off, it pushed in past that. So let's get this off, and then we'll store all these greasy bits over there. Snug. And you see, full of rust too. These are the bolts. Not exactly small. There, they're really in there. Even though I loosen them up, I'm still having to hold the hub with a pry bar to get them break free. Okay. Might just blow a little, put a little something inside those holes when I'm done, just to compressed air or maybe some brake clean or something. There's a lot of debris in there that's coming out with these bolts. Probably rust. So what I'm hoping, if you watched the video a while back where I, at night, drained the front diff, refilled it, checked the gears. If you remember, those gears looked pretty good. So what I'm hoping, really hoping, is that somebody, when they replaced the front brakes, the front had all new brake hardware on it when I got it. The front steering components are oddly tight, like the tie rod ends and stuff. They look old, but they don't look worn, like used. So I'm hoping that somebody worked on this thing and did, this may just come right off. Am I going to get lucky? Look at that, I don't even need a puller. So I'm hoping that somebody replaced everything in here and maybe did the bearings as part of that, and then these are just out of adjustment. Like that's It's got way too much play in it, and it spins way too freely. You want it to spin, but I feel like that's a lot. Like, there's no movement. If this moved, if you tried to jiggle the backing plate and it moved, that would mean, I believe, the ball joints, since the backing plate's bolted to the spindle, or rather through the spindle and into the knuckle. So if this were moving, that would indicate either bad ball joints if it moved this way, or if it moved that way, loose tie rod ends or steering components. It doesn't move anywhere. The only thing that moves is that. So that's good. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful these bearings are new and just need adjustment. So there's the dry flange. No puller needed. Just engages, bolts on. So let me grab another, put that on a paper towel. There. And keep all this junk together. It's a very messy job. Supposedly not hard, messy. So there's a lock washer, or rather a nut here. There should be a nut here. The lock washer, that's actually just a washer that's folded over, so that's actually right. These need to come off. There should be another one behind that, and then another washer. So it's effectively this. The innermost one is the actual one that sets the preload, and that's supposed to take all this movement out of there. And then this one is effectively locking the other one in place so it doesn't walk off and loosen the preload over time. I mean, the bearings, that thing sounds really good. There's no grinding, there's no gravelly sounds. So I'm really hoping it's just loose and someone was in a hurry and maybe didn't get it tight. So I'm gonna work on getting that out. There's a special tool for that. I haven't tried this yet. I don't know if it fits, but special tool. It's just a giant socket, 1/2-inch drive, and it just goes on there like that. It looks like it's the right size. This was labeled for, now that the thing's all covered in, again, there's the part number. It's an Omex ADA, Omex ADA, however you want to say it, 16711.01, and it's a spindle nut socket, 72 to 86 CJs. And this is effectively a CJ with more interesting bodywork. Alright, so I'm going to grab some kind of apparatus, probably a screwdriver. We'll pry that back and see how loose that is. I mean, it's not even, like, it's not even finger tight. So that's an indicator of what's possibly going on in there. So, alright, let me do this. In order to fold that, see, it was folded over right there. Punch, Harbor Freight punch set, hammer, and then just kind of put the nut on there, or the tool, just enough to break it loose by hand. Again, not tight. It probably should be tighter than that. So there's that. I'm going to put this over there. I'm going to do this in the order that it comes out. I need a magnet to get that out, or maybe it'll come out with this. I got pretty mangled with the punch just now, but if that'll just walk out of there, that'll be convenient. Otherwise, I'll get a magnet and pull it out. The grease in here looks relatively clean. There's not that much of it, which is a little concerning. But I think you'd want more grease than that in there. I'm probably going to put more than that in there. And there you can see how that gets folded over to act as a lock washer. Put that there. It's got a little bit of rust on it, on the back side of it. Now this thing, yeah, this thing is totally loose. Now, the service manual doesn't actually give a torque spec for this. It literally says tighten it until the hub won't spin, and then back it off 1/6 of a turn until there is no drag on the hub, or no play rather. You can see how much play is in that. And this is, I think this is finger tight. Like I can turn it, tighten it quite a bit with just my fingers. So next question. These bearings sound pretty good. I think rather than take all this apart, well, I guess I'm already halfway there. I just don't want to do this only to have the hub. I guess let's just go ahead and let's not be lazy. I really want to be lazy and just tighten this back up and move on. Let's pull it out and actually look at the bearings and do this the right way. I tried to be lazy with the turn signal switch. Ended up having to replace that anyway. So let's take this off. We know it's already loose. The chances are it's not a bad bearing, it's just loose. Put that on there like that. There should be another washer in there. Probably gonna need 2 hands for this. Okay, so just clean this off. That looks pretty good. This is where the bearings sit. A little discolored, but overall it's pretty good. That's the spindle. The hub itself, the back of it, it's a dust. Got a seal on it. Bearing itself, I'm gonna wipe it down and I'm gonna repack it. The grease on here is kind of thick, but it turns nicely. There's no real binding in it. The race down in there where it sits. Again, I'll wipe that out. I'm not gonna thoroughly like clean it out, but I'll wipe it out. I got some more grease I'll pack in there. Supposedly you're supposed to pack it until there's a lip in here, right there, a void between the outer and inner bearings. You're supposed to pack that full of grease. This has got some in it, but it's not completely full. And yeah, so this goes back in there like that and just gets pinched. Feels moves freely. Don't feel any grinding. Again, I don't know what brand this is, but it says made in USA on, oh, it's Timken. You can see that, probably not. Yeah, there you go, Timken. And it's one of the made in USA ones, so. All right, I'm gonna clean this up a little bit and then I'll get it ready to pack full, and then I'm just gonna slap it back on, tighten it back up, and then we'll go to the passenger side. All right, skipping ahead a bit. So I got it back in. I'm hesitant to show how I tightened it because I don't know that it's right, and I really don't want to tell somebody this is how you do it. But I'll tell you what I did. The manual just says tighten it until it is hard to move, and then back it off 1/6 of a turn. So that's 6 points. What I'm kind of judging it is, if the point's here, back it off until that point's up here somewhere. So 1/6 of a turn until it spins freely, but has no movement. This has no movement in it. Once I put the wheel on it, that extra leverage, I'm gonna test it. I've never done this style hub before. Caveat. So if you're watching this and you're thinking this is the right way to do it, you know, cross-reference something else. I'm hoping this is right. We'll find out if it burns up. If you get them too tight, it'll burn the bearings up. If you get it too loose, it obviously walks back and forth. This was incredibly loose, way too loose. I know that much. So what I've done is I repacked the bearings. They're in good shape. And I didn't show that process because it was so greasy. But the point is, you get the bearings, you put a blob of grease in your hand, and you just drag it across your hand until the shmoo comes from the bottom out of the top, with the narrow side of the bearing up, the tapering up, flap on the bottom, and just, you know, rock it back and forth in your hand, squishing grease out until it comes out of the top of the bearing. Again, there's 1.5 million videos showing how to do that. You don't need me to show you. But I repacked that cavity I showed you in here with this grease. This is the stuff I'm using. I don't know if it's the right grease, but it's wheel bearing grease. Got a flag on it, so you know it's good. In all seriousness, Lucas is good stuff. At least I've had good luck with it. And it's green, so how cool is that, right? Whatever. Point is, it's in there. I repacked that cavity. I repacked the bearings. The rear bearing, you have to take the dust seal out, so I packed a whole bunch of grease in there with it, but I did not repack that bearing. I don't have a tool to remove the dust seal, and I really don't want to damage that seal and have to go buy a new one. I don't have it. So this is supposed to have a gasket on it as well. It did not, so I'm not going to put one back on it. I don't have one anyway. I planned on reusing it. It's not there, so I am going to put just a little more grease in here. I don't know how full it's supposed to be. It doesn't say. But I'm going to pack some in here just to kind of limit debris and stuff that gets in there. And also, as those parts move, I want to have plenty of lubrication in there. And what else? So the lock washer's back in there. You know, it only goes in one way, so the folded part at the top, I'll fold that back down. This is snugged down tight. It's not super duper tight. It's not like He-Man tight, but you know, using this thing here, I just snugged it down. And there you go. So I don't exactly know how free that's supposed to be, but just like that, it moves fine. I'm going to put the wheel back on. I did try this several times to see a combination between being too tight and too loose. Like, I don't know how much drag is supposed to be on this. Like, I don't think it's supposed to freewheel, but that might be a little too tight. I don't know. So if I don't know, it turns around at least one revolution with just spinning it. But it was really hard. It was either really tight, like hard to turn, or had play in it. So this is kind of the compromise. It's about as loose as I could get it without play in it and not being super tight, because that, yeah, I don't think these were fully seated either on the hub, whoever installed it last. But that's enough rambling. So I'm going to fold that back over. The next step is going to be to get, where's my dry flange? To get this back on. And again, I'm going to put a little grease in the back of that too. And then the snap ring goes back on, dust cap. And we'll go from there. Okay. So I ended up taking it apart again just to check it. I went back and looked at the service manual, and it does indeed say tighten that down until the hub binds. Back it out a 1/6 of a turn. Put the lock nut, the outer nut on. I couldn't tighten it enough to get it to bind, but it got really stiff, so I called it good. This is about where I'm at. If that's too tight or too loose, but I know the bearings, spinning it back and forth, there's no grinding, there's no binding. I am kind of worried that might be a little too tight, but like I said, I've never done these before. But again, I can't, if I back it up too much more, the nut's actually loose and I get more play in it, so I think I'm going to leave it there. So I've repacked that. I did try to fold that back over. It's hard to tell, but it is folded this way just a hair. I can't really get a good bite on it. It's bending my punches, those high quality Harbor Freight punches. So for the dry flange, I just kind of packed that little recess in the back with grease, wiped down the lip there and the mating surface, and this kind of stuff. So let's put this thing back on. It should go back on like that. Yeah, so what I'm gonna have to do is I'm gonna have to pull try to get the axle shaft out a little bit. So if you push on the U-joint, there's where the lock ring goes, or the snap ring. So I'm gonna get this lined up so that the flange and the hub are lined up. Bolt this back down, lock ring back on. I'm gonna pack that dust cap full of grease as well. Although the way this is designed, I don't think it really needs to have too much grease in it, since the bearing it's separated from it by this flange. But at the very least, hopefully it'll keep this flange here from rusting to the inside of the dust cap again. And there's a little bit of grease in each one of these holes. That wasn't really intentional, but it is what it is. Just simply from trying to wipe up the grease on the hub. I'm going to put it back together, put the brake drum and wheel back on, and give it a spin and see how it behaves. Like I said, I'm so worried it's too tight, but if I loosen it up even an eighth of a turn, it has play in it again. So I'm thinking it's about where it needs to be. And if it burns up, we'll know. All right, there it goes back together. Like nothing ever happened, except for the fact that it's all covered in grease now. The wheel turns about the same as it did, so it'll turn about one full revolution if you give it a good spin. There's no more side-to-side movement at all. This thing is solid. So I don't know, I'm gonna keep my fingers crossed. Worst case, if I burn them up from being over tight, parts are relatively cheap. I mean, it's like 30 or 40 bucks for cheap bearings. The ones that are in it are probably a little more expensive than that. But yeah. One side done. I'm going to go ahead and do the passenger side. I'm probably not going to film that unless for some reason it's different than this, if I happen to have some problem that you guys might find interesting. But yeah, there's no torque spec for these that I could find, so I just tightened them until they wouldn't tighten anymore. And I'm not using an impact or anything, just the 1/2-inch drive ratchet. So I'm not going too hog wild with it. When I set this tire back down, when I torque the lug nuts, I'll run over these again just to make sure they're good and tight. I did pack that about a quarter of the way full of grease. You know, most of the space in there is filled up by that flange and the end of the axle stuff. So nothing squirted out, so I didn't get too much in there. But I wanted to have enough to kind of keep moisture and stuff from being able to pool in there, and rust it back onto the hub. Alrighty, let's get this thing off the jack, get the other side off and do that, and then we'll wrap it up. Alright folks, I'm done. Passenger side came apart just like the driver. Nothing really different. A couple of the drive flange bolts were seized on that side, so it took a little persuasion with the breaker bar and hammer. I really don't want to break one of those off inside the hub, so I was a little ginger with it, as ginger as you can be with a hammer and a breaker bar. But I put just a dab of grease on the shank of each one of those. You know, it's about this long before the threads start, and I think that's what's doing it. I also turned the hub upside down and kind of banged it on the concrete to get all the schmutz out of the threads, the blind holes. So yeah, all that's done. It went back together. Same process as the driver's side. Like the driver's side, I still don't know if I'm right, but you know, I'm doing the best I can with the knowledge I have. And yeah, first time ever doing these kind of hubs, so we'll get it out on the road. I wanted to get this done before I drive it back across town to get the parts installed in the rear end. All those parts are here finally. It's taken, what, a month to get everything due to shipping delays and part availability, but every part is here, so I need to make an appointment. The mechanic is about 2 weeks out, seems to be the running theme around here right now, so it may be a month or so before that's actually done. But I wanted to get the front end kind of squared away, didn't want it to eat itself alive, you know, driving it up and down the road. It's only 3 or 4 miles to the shop, but a lot of twisties, and those were incredibly loose. So if anything, maybe they're over tight now, I don't know, which is almost as bad. So thanks for watching, and if anything happens between now and the time that I get the rear end worked on, I'll try to film it. Otherwise, I'll get you guys an update once that's installed. Maybe we'll do a kind of a short break-in, you know, we'll drive it around town or try to get some miles on it. But yeah, hope you enjoyed that, hope you found it informative. And you know, like I said, there's plenty of videos online that show you, from people who know more about it than I do, how to pack the bearings, how to make sure the preload is correct. So, you know, look around, find plenty of examples, and then kind of do what you think is right. But this is how I did it, and you know, I'll be honest with you, if it burns up, I'll show you, and you'll know. So there you go.